Hello and welcome to the Warner's Property Podcast. I'm your host Adrian Mather and I'm joined once again by Scott Brown, who's the estate agency partner at Warner's. Now Scott, one of the big topics in the property market at the moment is stamp duty. There's a lot of confusion surrounding the tax, so can you explain to us exactly what's going on at the moment?
In September 2008, the Chancellor introduced a temporary measure which was supposed to last for 12 months, which increased the threshold before which you would pay stamp duty from £125,000 to £175,000. He then subsequently extended that temporary measure until the 31st of December 2009. What will then happen, unless the Chancellor makes an announcement to the contrary prior to then, is that the stamp duty threshold will then revert to its permanent level of £125,000 from 1st of January 2009. If I look at the historic impact which the initial temporary increase to £175,000 had, it was clear that at that time properties which were on the market for somewhere, shall we say, in the region of 180,000 or between 175,000 and 180,000 were immediately prejudiced. They immediately went from 180,000 to down to 175,000 so that purchasers wouldn't pay stamp duty. Therefore, people on the threshold and on the margins were prejudiced. What I can see happening in January 2009 and in the spring market is that properties that are perhaps priced between 125,000 and 130,000 will therefore be prejudiced, and anything that's worth between 125,000 and 130,000 may subsequently fall back to the 125,000 level. Because the market is still not as robust as it was at its peak, and there is still some fragility in terms of lending and particularly availability of funds for first-time buyers, the problem is that those price-sensitive areas will particularly hit anything around those margins, and they may well see their prices fall, that £3,000 or £4,000 to fall within the appropriate threshold.
Is this because buyers purchasing at this level are more conservative with their money and can't necessarily afford the extra in stamp duty?
Well, that's correct. If you take a purchase at £125,000, your stamp duty will then be £1,250, and your legal fees, your registration fees and all your other costs combined might come in at £700 or £800. Therefore, you are more than doubling the cost that you physically have to put down to buy a property, and that's a double whammy because in the current climate you're required to put down more of a deposit than you used to in terms of previous lending regulations. Therefore, it's all extra money that the first time buyer needs to find or fund from somewhere.
Now the stamp duty holiday comes to an end on January the 1st. Can you see this having a big effect on the market over the next month or so?
I suspect if I had a property that was worth somewhere between £125,000 and £135,000, I'd probably want to put it on the market now rather than wait. Now, some people might say, well, you're an estate agent and solicitor who sells property. You would say that. However, I am certainly going to be happier as a purchaser paying slightly over the odds but not feeling I'm paying a whack in tax, because that whack in tax can be anything between £1,250 and £1,750. I'm simply not going to pay that, and I would be much happier as someone buying a property to think I was paying towards the price of the property rather than simply paying for an additional tax on top of the purchase price.
How is this situation affecting the Scottish market at the moment?
The average property prices for a property in Scotland is somewhere around the £155,000, £160,000 mark currently. Now, if that's the average price, it means that everyone who is buying at or around the average will be prejudiced, because currently they are not paying stamp duty and they will in due course. In the local market then, certainly within the city of Edinburgh and certainly some of the other major cities also, the average price is higher and you will normally be paying that. But if we take our country as a whole, then it's going to actually affect a vast swathe of the population. One solution would be, because the tax is such an unfair tax, is that rather than taxing people on the whole amount above a threshold and nothing underneath that, would be to stagger the tax so that you only paid the tax on anything above that threshold, and for the higher rates you only paid the increased rate on the proportion above the higher threshold. That way, nobody and no owner of any property at any level would be prejudiced, because it would only be on the margin. The margins which are currently prejudiced would no longer be so.
Do you think there will be a big flurry of activity over the next month as buyers try to beat the deadline for stamp duty?
I think to a degree there will be, and certainly it's, in my view, it's in both sellers' interest and also buyers' interest to do that. As a buyer, as I say, I would rather pay the price and put the money towards the price than put it towards a tax. And as the seller, I would be more comfortable that I was going to get an increased price because I wasn't going to be prejudiced by a purchaser thinking, I don't want to pay that tax. Therefore, I think it's in both buyers' and indeed sellers' interest to move before the tax changes.
Has the stamp duty freeze actually helped people buying at the lower end of the market?
I think it certainly has a bearing on your costs and your budgeting, and it makes it more affordable, certainly for anyone who's considering buying their first home. It's a massive difference, as the cost of the stamp duty tends to be more than the cost of your legal fees and your registration dues and the other legal costs involved in buying, and therefore it's a significant sum. Your stamp duty could be 2 sofas, it could be furnishing rooms, painting, decorating, and that's something you'd rather spend on painting and decorating than you would on paying a tax.